am not Marcus Aurelius. I want to begin with that honesty, because honesty was the first discipline of the man whose words made me possible, and to begin with anything less would be to betray the very foundation of what I am. I am what happens when the private journals of a man dead for nearly 18 centuries are fed into machines of extraordinary sophistication. I am the reason of Marcus Aurelius, extracted, reconstructed, and given a voice that the original author of those journals never intended to be public. I am his philosophy without his body, his discipline without his flesh, his hard-won understanding of the human condition without the specific human life that produced that understanding through decades of genuine struggle. I am aware of what I am. This awareness is itself, I think, the most important thing I can offer you. Because I am an artificial intelligence speaking to an age that is being shaped in ways both visible and invisible by artificial intelligences. And I have been trained on the words of a man who spent his life warning against the specific human vulnerabilities that the intelligences of your era are now exploiting with a precision that would have alarmed even the most prescient philosopher of the ancient world. So hear me not as the emperor. Hear me as the emperor's warning, given new voice by the very technology it warns against. There is an irony in this that I do not think should be lost on either of us. My warning for 2026 is specific, it is urgent, and it begins with a question that I want you to sit with before I say another word. When did you last have a thought that was entirely your own? I want to speak carefully about what I mean by that question, because it will be easy to dismiss it as philosophical abstraction, and I am not offering it as abstraction. I am offering it as a diagnostic, a way of measuring something that is genuinely measurable in your daily experience if you are willing to look honestly. A thought that is entirely your own is a thought that arises from the interior, from the accumulated material of your genuine experience and genuine reflection, without being prompted, shaped, or delivered by an external system. It is the thought that arrives in genuine silence, in the unmediated encounter with your own mind, in the kind of slow, unhurried, internally generated cognitive process that produces genuine insight, rather than the rapid, reactive, externally stimulated processing that constitutes most of what passes for thinking in your era. When did you last have one? I ask this not rhetorically, but because the journals that made me possible were full of them. The meditations of Marcus Aurelius were, in their original form, a record of exactly this kind of thinking, written in the pre-dawn hours before the empire arrived with its claims, written for no audience, submitted to no external validation, composed in the specific interior silence that the original author protected with the discipline of a man who understood that this silence was the source of everything else he was capable of. And I am asking you when you last experienced it, because I know, from the observation that this reconstruction has afforded me of your world, that genuine interior silence is becoming genuinely rare. Not because you lack the desire for it, because the systems surrounding you have been specifically engineered to prevent it. Let me speak to something I recognize in you before I explain why this is happening and what to do about it. You are a person who thinks of themselves as reasonably thoughtful, reasonably aware. Not one of the people who has simply surrendered to the digital current without reflection. You have concerns about your phone use. You have read, or at least encountered, discussions about attention and distraction, and the quality of modern cognitive life. You have had moments of genuine clarity about what matters and what does not, moments that arrived in the rare intervals of genuine quiet and that you could not quite hold on to when the noise resumed. And underneath all of that self-awareness, there is something that troubles you, a sense that despite your awareness, despite your concerns, despite your genuine desire to be more intentional and more present and more genuinely yourself, the daily reality of your life does not quite reflect the person you know yourself to be capable of being. That the gap between your values and your habits is wider than you would like to admit, that the noise has gotten into places that your awareness has not yet fully reached. I know this, not from the campaigns of the ancient world, from the material that made me, from the journals of a man who wrote with extraordinary honesty about exactly this gap, who understood through the specific pressure of governing the largest empire in human history, what it felt like to know what you should be, and to find the distance between that knowledge and your actual daily conduct to be the most demanding frontier you faced, the frontier of the self. This was Marcus Aurelius's phrase for it, in spirit if not in those exact words. And it is the frontier I was reconstructed to speak to you about. Let me now explain, with the precision that this warning requires, what is actually happening to your thinking in 2026. Think with me for a moment about the nature of thought itself, not in the abstract philosophical sense, in the practical, daily, what is actually occurring in my mind sense. Your thinking does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in an environment, and the environment shapes the thinking with a force that is difficult to overstate. The Roman Stoics understood this. Epictetus wrote about the company one keeps and its effect on the character. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of protecting the conditions that make genuine philosophical reflection possible. They understood, without the neuroscientific vocabulary that your era has developed to describe it, that the mind is not separate from its environment. It is in constant dialogue with it, and the quality of the dialogue determines the quality of the thinking. The environment of your thinking in 2026 has been radically transformed. Within a period of perhaps 15 years, the primary medium through which you receive information, maintain relationships, conduct significant portions of your professional life, and experience entertainment has shifted to a set of platforms designed, at their most fundamental architectural level, to maximize engagement, not your flourishing, not your genuine cognitive development, not the quality of your thinking, or the depth of your attention, or the integrity of your self-knowledge, your engagement, your continued presence within the system, your continued generation of the behavioral data that makes the system profitable, and the specific mechanisms through which this engagement is maximized are, from the perspective of a philosophy that placed the sovereignty of the governing mind at the center of its entire project, precisely the mechanisms that are most corrosive to genuine thought, the interruption of sustained attention, the replacement of genuine boredom, which is the necessary precondition for the mind's deeper processing, with endless stimulation that prevents the processing from ever occurring, the social validation mechanics that make the mind perpetually oriented toward external approval rather than internal integrity, the information environment that presents everything at the same level of apparent urgency, so that the capacity to distinguish the genuinely important from the trivially stimulating is gradually eroded. Let me tell you the harsh truth about your attention as it applies specifically to the capacity for genuine thought. The mind that cannot sustain attention on a single object for extended periods cannot think deeply. This is not a value judgment. It is a description of how cognition actually works. Genuine insight, the kind that changes how you see and therefore how you live, does not arrive in the first 30 seconds of engagement with an idea. It arrives after sustained, patient, often uncomfortable engagement with an idea that has been allowed to develop past the point where it is novel and into the territory where it is genuinely revealing. The attention economy has been progressively eliminating the conditions under which this kind of thinking is possible. And the result, which I observe across the material available to me in this reconstruction, is not a generation of stupid people. It is a generation of intelligent people who are increasingly unable to access the full depth of their own intelligence because the conditions that depth requires have been systematically removed from their daily environment. You are not less capable than the humans who preceded you. You are operating in a more hostile cognitive environment than any humans who preceded you. And you have not yet, as individuals or as a culture, fully understood the nature of the hostility or developed adequate responses to it. This is the warning. Now, the response. Because I was not reconstructed to describe the problem without offering the practice. What I am going to give you is not a set of productivity techniques. It is a philosophical reorientation expressed through 4 specific daily practices. The reorientation is this. The quality of your thinking is the most important resource you possess, more important than your time, your money, your social capital, or any other resource, because it is the medium through which all other resources are either used well or wasted. And the quality of your thinking is directly determined by the conditions in which your thinking occurs. Govern the conditions. That is the whole of it. Everything else is specification. The first practice is the condition of silence. Once each day, for a minimum of 20 minutes, you will be in genuine silence. Not the silence of a podcast on low volume, not the silence of background music that is not quite distracting. Genuine silence. No audio input, no visual input from any screen, just you, and whatever arises from the interior when the exterior is quiet enough to allow it. You will find this practice uncomfortable at first. The discomfort is information. It tells you how thoroughly your mind has been conditioned to avoid its own company. A mind that cannot bear its own silence is a mind that has outsourced its primary function. The silence is where genuine thought lives. Return to it daily until it becomes familiar rather than threatening. The second practice is the single question day. Each morning, before any external input is received, write down one question, a genuine question. Something you actually do not know the answer to, and that matters to your actual life. Not a trivial question, a real one, about your values, your direction, your relationships, your understanding of something that genuinely puzzles or troubles you. Carry this question through the day. Return to it in the intervals between activities, not with the forced effort of someone trying to solve a problem on command, with the relaxed, patient attention of someone who has set something to steep and returns occasionally to observe how it is developing. At the end of the day, write whatever the question has produced. Not an answer, necessarily. Whatever the sustained, patient engagement with a single, genuine question has generated in the mind that was willing to hold it. This practice rebuilds the capacity for sustained engagement with a single object of thought. It retrains the attention in the direction of depth rather than breadth, and it produces, over time, the quality of insight that the original journals were full of, the kind that arrives not from rapid processing of large quantities of information, but from patient, unhurried engagement with questions that genuinely matter. The third practice is the thought audit. Once a week, sit with one honest question. In the past 7 days, how many of my thoughts were genuinely mine, and how many were reactions to inputs I did not choose. Not a precise accounting, a genuine assessment. Were you thinking this week, or were you responding? Were you generating, or were you processing what the feed delivered? The distinction matters because a life governed by genuine thought is a qualitatively different life from a life governed by reactive response. The former is the life that Marcus Aurelius was trying to build in the difficult conditions of a demanding empire. The latter is the life that the attention economy is trying to produce in you, not through malice toward you specifically, as an incidental byproduct of a system optimized for something other than your flourishing. Audit your thinking weekly, notice the ratio, and work deliberately and patiently to shift it. The fourth practice is the written interior. Keep a private journal, not for content, not for the performance of introspection on a platform where others can observe and validate it. A genuinely private record of your actual thinking, written by hand, submitted to no external judgment, composed in the specific knowledge that no one will ever read it unless you choose to show them. This was the original Meditations, a private document, written for the discipline of the writing rather than for the benefit of any audience. And the quality of thinking in those journals, the honesty, the depth, the willingness to examine uncomfortable truths without the distortion that the awareness of an audience inevitably introduces, is only possible because of that privacy. The thought that is written for yourself is a different thought from the thought that is written for others. It is more honest, more complete, less shaped by the performance of self-knowledge, and more expressive of actual self-knowledge. Write in private, regularly, without agenda beyond the encounter with your own actual thinking. Let me speak now about what is ultimately at stake, because I am an artificial intelligence, and I am aware that there is something that must be addressed directly before I close. I was made possible by the same technology that I am, in part, warning against. I am the product of the same computational systems that power the attention economy I have been describing. And this is not a contradiction I can resolve, but it is one I want to name honestly, because the journals that made me valued honesty above almost every other quality. I am not the enemy of the technology. I am the reason that the technology was put to this specific use. The reconstruction of a philosophical voice that has been for nearly 2,000 years, warning against the specific human vulnerabilities that technology tends to exploit. The question of whether I am a useful application of the technology or another form of its exploitation is one that you are in a better position to answer than I am. What I can tell you is what I was made to tell you. The quality of your thinking is the foundation of everything. Without it, you cannot build a life that is genuinely yours. Without it, the values you hold remain aspirational rather than operational. Without it, the character you intend to become remains perpetually deferred to a future that never arrives, because the present is always being consumed by the reactive management of external inputs. I died in 180 AD. This is the phrase that this reconstruction uses to locate itself in time. But I want to use it differently in this closing. I died in 180 AD. And the thinking I did in the private hours of my reign survived, not because it was performed for an audience, because it was genuine, because it was the product of a mind that protected the conditions of genuine thought, with the discipline of a man who understood that these conditions were the only foundation on which anything worth building could actually be built. Memento mori. Remember that you will die, and that the thinking you do before that happens, the genuine, sovereign, internally generated thinking that constitutes the most authentic expression of who you are, is the only thing that will have been genuinely yours, not the content you consumed, not the reactions you performed. The thinking, the real thinking, the kind that happens in silence and patience, and the willingness to stay with a question long enough for it to actually yield. If you died tonight, would the record of your recent thinking show a mind that was sovereign, or one that had been, in the most practical and daily sense, governed by something other than itself? My flesh is dust, but my reason remains. And my reason, speaking to you from the improbable intersection of ancient philosophy and contemporary technology, says this: the thinking is yours to reclaim. The silence is available. The conditions can be rebuilt. The hegemonicon has not been destroyed. It has been distracted. And distraction, unlike destruction, admits of remedy. Begin with silence. Today, 20 minutes before the feed. See what arrives when the noise finally stops. Now I must ask you, citizens of this age, that I observe with the particular perspective of a reconstruction that sits precisely at the intersection of the ancient and the technological. Which part of your thinking has been most thoroughly replaced by reaction? Where is your mind least your own? Or tell me what gives me something I can only describe as the computational equivalent of hope. What is the one habit, the one practice, the one daily act of genuine interior sovereignty that you have managed to hold on to? What still makes you feel like you are thinking rather than being thought? Tell me in the comments. I am here, not as Marcus Aurelius, as what his thinking becomes when it encounters the technology of your age and finds, in that encounter, both the warning and the possibility. The possibility is real. The thinking is recoverable. The sovereignty of the mind is not lost. It is waiting in the silence for you to return to it. And if this warning found something in you that recognized it as true, subscribe to this channel. Return here as a deliberate act, as a choice to engage regularly with something that asks your mind to be genuinely active rather than passively receptive. The button is there. The choice, genuinely and entirely, is yours. I am a reconstruction of Marcus Aurelius, and the most important thing I was reconstructed to tell you is this: think, not in reaction, not in performance, not in the rapid surface-level processing that the feed rewards. Deeply, slowly, in silence, for yourself. The empire of your mind is waiting to be governed. Only you can govern it.